Hello and welcome back to Sinews of War. In the previous episode, I was surprised by a war with Russia breaking out. Luckily, all my allies joined me, but I needed a way to deal with this new threat. I decided to try and wrap up the war with Poland, first attacking a few of their lightly guarded targets to steal a few minor regions from them, and then I did successfully get peace with them with a hefty bit of payment as well. So that left forces free to go and face the Russians, but our first engagement was actually at sea, where the Russian warships absolutely obliterated our East African trade fleet, so that is not good at all. We started to hit back though. First, we landed forces near St. Petersburg and took the city, so now we have an army right in Russia's core. And we also pushed against the regular front line with Gaiden leading an assault on the fortified positions outside Kiev. It was a scrappy battle with heavy losses on both sides, but eventually we captured the region and now we await a Russian response. Rest assured that somewhere out in the vast expanses of the east, I am tipping my hat to your old advice, Gerard. The fortifications of Kiev fell according to your predictions, and by a decent imitation of your favourite methods. I think I lacked the nuances of coordination you command, but to all but myself, the important result is the victory. Just a day after the city surrendered, I received curious word from the States General. I am to be made a lord of the realm, and gifted some appropriate lands around Athens for my troubles. Not long ago, if I had walked out of my office and declared myself a lord, I would be shot before the tassels on my braid had come to rest. But now I must bear the contemptible eyes of men forced to bow to a man selected for special treatment, by another man selected for special treatment, all for reasons ill-defined. I only tell you all this to rile you up. But I also write on a professional matter. The greatness of Russia is too much for me to overcome, even if I am meant to be joining that old git Ouwater as the king's new pet general. I'm sure you have some terribly important orders to attend to, but I'd be willing to share the blame if you were to ignore them. I could do with the company of someone who'll enjoy cooking my new commissions over a bed of gunpowder. So we've just taken Kiev. The place is in a right state, so we need to start repairing it up. The public order situation is good though. We probably won't move out immediately because we want to see what Russia does in response to this. We can see they have several armies around the place, a couple already in the Ukraine. So one there, almost a full stack over to the east. They've got another portion, a smaller army coming from the southeast. Voss is actually going to sneakily try and help Gaiden out here by coming around in the next turn perhaps to go and cut off the Russians in the Crimea. I also move this rake up towards Moscow to see what's going on, and there's plenty more forces up here, perhaps a full stack between those three different armies, one of which in the town itself, and of course there's probably even more outside in the fog of war. Now over in my sneaky St. Petersburg attack group, I decided to detach some troops to come down towards Riga, thinking it's probably going to have no garrison and we can just capture it with a few units just to hammer home the damage to Russia. That settlement's actually worth a fair bit of money as well, so it is worth going over to take it. Now at the main force, I'm wondering whether I'm going to face an attack from the Moscow direction, but what I hoped was that Gaiden's advance would be distracting those troops and making them all go towards Ukraine. So Ouwater is going to be free to basically sneak up to the northeast there and take that settlement and then come back, just so we don't have that rear flank exposed and can focus entirely on the southern and eastern fronts. So he'll start marching that way. It'll be next turn before he arrives, just a few troops on the road in between. Now in the Americas, I'm going to do a pretty disastrous mistake. Well, not disastrous, but stupid really. First of all, I was trying to load up my troops into the fleet of Kalemba, noting that Kalemba is in his 70s. He's very old, but we're going to see if we can get at least one last helpful mission out of him, because he's going to need to take the troops led by Voorhees down towards South America, because one of our new missions for the West India Company is to unify the South American territories under ourselves, and that's going to contribute towards our victory conditions. Unfortunately, as you can see, when I moved down towards Curacao, thinking maybe I'll pick up some reinforcements here, I realised I actually have left the entire army behind. Somehow I messed up the embarkment dialogue and ended up leaving the entire army in the docks, so that was good, and that's going to delay my plan. So perhaps in the future we'll see that attack I was thinking of, but not right now. So back in Europe, as we go through the end turn sequence, the Ottomans come back for round 2. It's another declaration of war. Not convenient at all, but at least they're in the same region of the world as Russia. So my forces are already kind of around here. So it's not the worst thing in the world. So we're going to accept that declaration, and all of our allies join us and their allies don't. So that's fantastic. That's as good as that could be. Luckily, they don't have any attacks for us right away. They don't make any moves, so they weren't really prepared, it seems. Now it's time to see what the Russians do, and their forces are moving all over the place. Hard to see what their overall strategy is, but it seems they're both consolidating forces near Moscow, and they're gradually pushing forces in towards Kiev, perhaps thinking of retaking it. So we see various armies moving around, not making as much progress as they could, but overall, a very slightly tightening noose around Kiev seems to be formed by all these different armies. So we'll have to try and react to that if we can. We can see them now. We've got forces coming in from the south and a couple from the east as well. Quite a lot of men. They would overwhelm Gaiden, but I've got reinforcements on the way as well. So we can keep spamming up Gaiden's army until it's basically 2 stacks. But now we've got the Ottomans to worry about, and you can see they've got absolutely loads of forces gathered there. So we're going to have to try and be careful. We do know their troops are trash quality, but they've got so many that the minor forces we have here in the Balkans aren't going to be enough. So I'm going to start rapidly recruiting new forces and try and get a couple of armies together to stop the Ottomans if they make a move. My attack on Riga is going to continue. We arrive to discover it's just got 2 garrison line infantry and some citizenry. So I was actually surprised here that the balance bar wasn't more in our favour, because we've got 3 professional infantry and 2 cavalry. But I guess it's because the enemy have fortifications here. That's enhancing their strength. So I decided what I'll do is, since I can't really send over yet more troops as reinforcements without at least waiting a while for the attack to go ahead, I can just recruit a general out of these forces to give me an extra unit and of course improve the abilities of the entire army. So we get this new guy called Vermeers. He's actually pretty good. He's one of these man's man soldier types who the men respect, so he's going to be nice leading that little attack group. Now Ouwater continues his path north, and this balance bar took me by surprise. Apparently there's almost a whole stack of Russian forces somewhere off in the fog of war out here on the edge of the map. So now it looks like we're in trouble, and my mouse was hovering over the retreat button there instinctively, but I thought, hang on a second, these troops don't have generals, and a lot of them have low morale, as I could see by going over these tooltips here, and I thought maybe this battle is actually going to be a lot easier than it looks, because we may not have to engage many of these forces at all. We can just smash them apart and continue as planned, plus deny Russia an army. So we're going to give this battle a go. Clearly you're worried, unless you're sweating from how warm all this snow's made you. They do indeed have us outnumbered, 3-1 by the last account. But a professional soldier is worth 2 forest folk to start with. They have very few firearms, so make it 3. They have no command structure, so make it 4. They have no artillery or cavalry, so make it 5. And then when you consider that the men you lead are the world's finest, you'll promptly find that your men are worth enough to make a 10-1 fight seem like a sure victory. So please stop telling me that the enemy are strong. They aren't strong, they're just there. We'll kill them, take this useless land, and send a message to Moscow that King Wilhelm returns aggression tenfold. To begin the battle, we're going to smash the enemy with their artillery. They don't have any, so there's nothing they can do about this. Plus it means that although we're the attacker, it's going to turn this into a defensive battle, because they have to advance against us. So they abandon their defences as they already start taking heavy losses from that fire and start marching towards us. And in a lucky break early on, that artillery barrage actually kills the commander of the enemy's initial army. Their force runs backwards. It's not actually routing, they're just choosing to run away, leaving the other unit to advance on its own. So very interesting. Their cavalry also not even helping their advance, but most of their force going to be coming in as reinforcements, so they're going to be filing onto the field. But that's not going to stop them from starting a few attacks early on. So let's take a quick look at our line. We've got cavalry on the left, and in the centre we've got a lot of this kind of infantry, this Scots line infantry, a very high level, powerful line infantry unit with high accuracy and stats, all the way from Scotland to fight for our king for reasons unknown, I must say. We also have some Velbek infantry, superior line infantry as well. The artillery in the centre are going to have to get out of the way because the enemy's line infantry here look like they're going to make an assault, so I'm going to pull the artillery back to put them somewhere safer. They're only out there in front because there's nowhere nice to put them on this battlefield, unfortunately. So those infantry are going to go and attack my flank. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the rest of the line. More grenadiers in the centre there, Scots infantry on the right of the centre, and then on the far right we've got the 2 units of Voss's militia, the demons and the devils, who are going to be forming up in front of our partially hidden cavalry detachment, almost acting as a bait to draw the enemy over there so the cavalry can charge out and get some kills on the enemy's low morale infantry. Meanwhile, that unit of line infantry wants to make an attack. Not a good idea. The Scots here hiding behind all these walls can now just start taking pot shots at them, and the enemy are just going to mess about and not fire back for a while. The dragoons on the edge then even getting involved, so not going to be a very good time for that line infantry unit. But over on the other side of the battlefield, the militia are starting to get involved in the battle because the enemy sent some gun cav in to skirmish with them. Our side easily won. Gun cav can't fight toe-to-toe with line infantry, so off they went. But actually they came back almost straight away. They came back from routing and charged in for round 2. Once again getting cut down, and this time they tried to focus on these dragoons on the edge of the line, but the dragoons of course also being gun cav, they just volley right back at them, and the enemy routed before they got particularly close. So there we go, another unit rebuffed by the militia, who so far are actually doing pretty well. So that unit of line infantry over on the other side of the battlefield has been cut to pieces. Still hasn't really fired at us because the AI is just screwing around with it right now, but we're almost wasting ammo firing at it, really thinking about it. But anyway, I've got my dragoons over here who are going to come in and try and just run up to the flank of that unit and just blast them point blank range, and that was enough to get rid of them. But while all that was happening, the enemy's reinforcements were forming up. I actually thought they would just do the classic move of running in a big column formation, but they did decide to reform their army before making the attack. So that's going to improve the enemy's chances a fair bit. They've got various different kinds of line infantry, plus a lot of this militia unit, a melee militia that has low morale but incredibly high stats and high numbers. So interesting, we have to be careful with that unit. Now, as the enemy advanced, a lot of the units were bunched together like this, which made them prime targets for artillery, of course, so we're able to kill a lot of them by just pounding away at them. This also has a pretty big morale effect. We don't have to rout any units, unfortunately. Now, I've put my artillery in a really dangerous position. This is the only place on our battle line where they could fire without having the line of sight blocked, and it was right on the end of the left flank with nothing to protect them. And annoyingly, the enemy actually sent like 4 or 5 units all towards that part of the line rather than the center. So those artillery seem to be drawing a lot of attention, and it's actually ruining things. Nearer the centre, some units are making an attack, like these militia who are dancing around in front of the line getting shot. So the fact they're not just charging right in really going to help us right now. We're going to deplete their numbers before the battle really gets started. Further down where we're behind walls here, we're not going to be firing as fast because you can't use fire by rank with the walls for whatever reason, but the enemy don't have fire by rank either, and a lot of their men are actually just not even going to go towards the centre. As I mentioned, they're trying to hit these guns, so unfortunately for the guns, this is going to be the end. There's not really much we can do to stop this because they're too slow to move away, and all my other forces are committed. I don't want to move out of formation. I did put my cavalry, who were right behind the militia, all the way over here, since the guns seem to have become the bait rather than the militia, but they're going to struggle because there's just so many enemy units attacking this sector. Some of them finally came in to engage with my infantry, who had folded a bit to stop the enemy outflanking me, and we're now going to blast at those Cossacks at close range with the Scots and fight them in melee in most cases. The Scots probably have superior melee stats, so that's all fine. Now, the enemy's militia are going to be chasing the artillery crew who routed, and that actually brings them away from the battle. And once that unit got isolated, I thought, let's just hit them with the cavalry death blob. All 3 of my cav units, including the heavy cuirassiers, are going to come in and smash against them. Now, the enemy are probably going to be pretty good against my cav. I'm really hoping it's morale that will get rid of them. We'll only have to kill a few, and then they'll rout, and we'll just slay the rest as they attempt to escape. On the other end of the line, my militia are in disarray because they've already had to repel one attack by the enemy's melee militia, and right after they successfully killed them with surprisingly few losses to their own unit, another unit comes in to engage them, and this enemy unit's going to have more luck. Now that we're tired and in disarray, they are going to start smashing into our formation. Our militia aren't very good in melee, but they are a leveled up militia, which is probably why they're putting in such a good performance. Plus they have some of the Voss magic attached to them. Down the line we've got an actual line battle going on, which line infantry versus our militia. Not the best situation, but we should be able to sort it out soon enough once my dragoons stop chasing down enemy routers. Now the Scots were having a little bit of trouble back on the left side because the number of enemies attacking them was so large. You can see we're getting pushed back. Luckily I was able to bring some cavalry over to flank attack these Cossack infantry, and that's going to be enough to rout them so we can reform reform our position there, getting rid of that unit, and the cavalry will be able to kill some of them as they go. So we destroyed that militia unit we attacked initially with the cavalry, but we took decent losses. Probably too many losses to keep doing it, but there's another one of the units coming in, a fresh one coming into the engagement, and they're just going to go pile into my Scots infantry. So really I need the cavalry to try and distract this unit and try and kill it, ideally, just to keep the main line free of being overwhelmed by melee units, which is always a bad idea. So they're going to do their best. They will be successful eventually, but it's going to be very bloody. On the other end of the line, the militia still under massive pressure. They've got tons of units forming up in front of them, and the enemy are going to pull the classic move once again of getting their line infantry and just charging them right in. Probably a good idea, since the militia aren't especially good in melee, as I said, but they did have a range advantage as well, so not quite so justified in this situation. The problem for them is that their supporting unit, this melee militia, is going to be distracted by my dragoons. So I told the dragoons to just skirmish, and we're going to draw that unit all the way away from the battle and of course be shooting them the whole time. And because these guys have picked a fight with Voss's militia, that was the wrong choice. We pushed them back, defeating yet another unit with these militia units, starting to get damaged now, but so far their performance on holding that right flank has been absolutely outstanding. More units routing in the centre as well, perhaps things starting to stabilise. Dear Mr. Grotius, you have no doubt heard of the news from Europe regarding Russia. The master of the puppet stadtholders presses ever more resources into his own conquests, yet puts ever more demands on our honourable selves. It is not for a moment I suggest that you do not observe those demands with all the vigour duty should bring. However, I urge a special kind of caution in these endeavours. The king is jealous beyond all measure of you and I both. For two merchants to have created empires worthy of royalty is something our new and wise benefactor appears to abhor. I suggest you sniff for gunpowder at every chance, for the good king has a history of disposing of his own countrymen in a quite spectacular manner. Almost as soon as we routed the enemy units via line battle in the centre, a load more units just charged right into melee, so now our men are being overwhelmed by the fact that the Russian regiments have superior numbers to us, so they're just swarming in. We're going to be killing loads of them in that melee because our men are just better, but there's so many enemies, it's still going to be challenging. The grenadiers next door there managing to keep the enemy back with musket fire, but soon they're going to be attacked as well. The militia once again in big trouble as yet more of these enemy melee militia come in to fight with them. So I'm surprised they've held so far, but once again they're managing to hold their ground against massively overwhelming numbers and statistics in terms of the enemy's unit. The dragoons that were drawing some of the enemy away unfortunately got caught when they hit the red line of death, but dragoons are actually surprisingly good in melee for a gun cav unit, so although they're going to be defeated there, they're going to take virtually all of the enemy unit with them. The rest of my regular cavalry were trying to kill routing units so that they would stop coming back from routing again and again, but one unit stopped routing and formed a square sneakily while I wasn't paying attention, so I had to call off that. They're going to come back in to try and rear attack some of the units already taking part in the battle so we can try and get them routing. Now over here you can see I put the dragoons up on the wall to help provide more fire on my left flank. The enemy moved up to outflank them, but they're having a really hard time shooting my men even at just a couple of meters range. The cover is somehow protecting my troops. I'm not sure if it's meant to work like that, but those dragoons very lucky to not be getting shot to pieces there. In the centre, the melee is starting to go in the enemy's favour. You can see they've kind of folded up. They've defeated one of my Scots regiments and have come around to attack the Valdic infantry next to them. So our central position is now basically open. No troops left except for grenadiers holding the centre right. Some of my cav trying to charge through enemy units, making desperate, tired attacks against enemy line infantry. Most of our cav are going to be routing off the field at this point. The cuirassiers, the heavier cav, going to keep going because they are made of sterner stuff. But really, we've lost our cavalry advantage now. On the right flank, the enemy are still putting more and more pressure on the militia, with more units appearing to engage with them. Mostly it's units coming back from routing, and there's their unit that defeated my dragoons. You can see they lost virtually all their troops, but they didn't rout, and that's something that's really surprising me about this battle. The enemy's morale is really low in terms of stats, but they are just absolutely not routing, even losing virtually entire regiments on their militia units. They're not routing. It might just be because it's on very hard and they're getting a big buff that the tooltips don't tell you about. So anyway, yet another attack comes in. Somehow they still have fresh militia units to pile against Voss's militia. So once again, they're forced to fight in deadly melee, and surely it's too much for them now. They've already destroyed several units standing in that position, and now they're going to be so tired and exhausted they can't really hold on much longer. In the centre, bad news as well. We've lost the Voldeck infantry that were holding off the enemy, so now we're down to just 2 Scots line infantry units in our centre and centre left. So they're going to turn to engage with the enemy's line infantry, who stopped to fire at us at point blank range. They formed a massive single file line. Great for them, since they don't have fire by rank. That's a good use of their firepower. I ended up just charging against them because we actually have local numerical advantage. I thought we'll just smash this thin line of troops by blasting through it with a quick charge, and that's going to be pretty effective. The enemy routed quite soon. I decided to move Ouwater in to try and support that attack, but the enemy actually routed before he got into the battle because he took a weird route for some reason, trying to go around the enemy's flank. So we defeated that unit. That's going to clear things up a tiny little bit. But on the right flank, the militia were finally destroyed, and now several enemy units are going to pile around into the rear of my centre right, where I had another unit of Scots holding off the enemy at range. So that's going to be pretty much the end for that half of my army. They get annihilated when they're sandwiched between enemy melee units. Not much left there. We've now got 2 units of Scots on the left and some grenadiers in the centre. We've still got the demi-cannons, I believe, and our general, but they're not going to be providing much help in this battle. The Scots also having trouble with actually firing at the enemy, just taking their time to get that going. Eventually, though, we are going to have to use those Scots in melee, because you can see the enemy are just overwhelming us by charging all over the place with these melee militia. The grenadiers in the centre, decent in melee, but they're totally surrounded, as you can see, and they were already really damaged from fighting in the line battles earlier in the fight. So I eventually decided, as I mentioned, to send the Scots in to try and attack them. I thought this might actually be pretty effective because we're kind of rear attacking the enemy since they had surrounded the grenadiers. Now we'll attack the encirclement. Ouwater has gone in as well with his guards to just slash amongst the enemy, and this actually works. We start seeing a mass rout of the enemy in this area. So we're going to try and chase after them to kill some of them, because the enemy's healthy enough that these units will almost certainly come back from routing. So Ouwater started to chase them off. But at this stage in the battle, as we get outflanked on the left as well, I decided, you know what, I think it's actually time to just withdraw. The final Scots unit, basically out of ammo and exhausted, is going to run as it starts taking flanking fire from that enemy unit. The demi-cannon's going to struggle to escape as well. They're super slow, but there's a chance of getting away. And the few survivors of the melees in the centre now going to make their escape before fresh enemy units arrive. They've got another unit of line infantry coming in there. I think they've got a full cavalry unit. Yes, they do. There it is. They hadn't deployed that cavalry unit for the entire battle. They just waited and waited, and finally at this last moment they deployed a full fresh unit of cav, which could easily destroy any of my units. And that's a big problem with my whole plan to withdraw, because of course as my men run, the cavalry are going to come in. So one unit of Scots gets away. Ouwater gets away with his guards. A few survivors from the grenadiers sneaking away there, but one unit of Scots had to stay as a rear guard to defeat the enemy's cav and the rest of the enemy's units that were coming back from routing to rejoin the fight. But they routed before any of that combat actually really took place. The demi-cannons somehow escaped because the enemy just didn't pay attention to them, and then the battle ended before their infantry could catch up with them. So the battle has ended in a defeat. These statistics aren't very useful because it doesn't have the reinforcements, so we'll see the real ones on the map. I don't understand. Why did he take his men into the attack if he knew the Russians were preparing an ambush? I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he threw men away during the assault on St. Petersburg, but now this too? Ouwater may turn out to be a monster. Such disregard for his own men and such haste to try and win petty glories for himself. He's the kind of general who deserves defeat, and the kind no soldiering man deserves to suffer. But what really makes my stomach sink is that I'll have no chance of getting his commission revoked. He's the king's servant, a champion of the counter-revolution by the virtue of blind luck, the untouchable man of the hour who is leading us to destruction. So the losses are heavy for both sides actually. Virtually our entire army lost, and the same thing for the enemy. We can see here in the stats that it was the heavy cavalry leading the tables, getting absolutely loads of kills, but even all of our units that did really well also got pretty much destroyed in the process. So we're not coming away with anything really from this victory. This has just been a mutual defeat of both our forces and the Russian forces. That means there's a pretty low chance we're going to face a counterattack, so that's something, but we've gained absolutely nothing for all that loss of life. Now a little bit further south, reinforcements are moving up to support Guyden's position in the Ukraine, so we now have a very hefty army defending the area around the settlement, and also Voss is now able to come over and help out as well. Now originally I was going to send him towards the Crimea, but I realised these Russian forces just south of Kiev are actually vulnerable to just being teamed up on by all the stacks I've now gathered in the area, so I arranged that and Voss leads the assault. We come in with a gigantic advantage on the balance bar, fantastic, our 3 stacks against the enemy is barely one of inferior troops, so we're just going to auto-resolve those guys out of existence, and our losses actually surprisingly heavy for what that fight was. I expected that to be basically complete destruction of the enemy for virtually no losses, so that's a bit of a shame, but saves time doing it ourselves. So we'll now start replenishing the troops that we did lose and re-establishing our defensive position near Kiev, because the Russians of course have more stacks hanging around, so we don't want to leave it open at any point. Now as we move on, let's have a look at the Russian turn, and like the last turn, they're going to be moving forces about all over the place. They don't seem to have any clear goal, some of them moving away from us, some of them moving towards us, but they do still have lots of forces marauding around in Ukraine, currently just destroying all of the infrastructure. They probably realise they can't actually attack the settlement because it's so heavily defended, so they're just going to try and bother me into coming out of the settlement, but of course we know better than to do that until we have overwhelming advantage. And before any of that happens, I decided first, let's go and take the Crimea, since it is basically undefended and all these armies around the place, if they are going to waste their time attacking our farms, which I don't even need, we'll attack their settlements and force them to do something. So that's going to be up to Voss. You can see I'm struggling here because it's not letting me move him. I've seen this glitch before, and as I'm playing this, I'm like, I'm sure I've solved this problem before. It doesn't let you move armies. What was it? And then I remembered it's because there's some sort of message you have to resolve that just hasn't shown up on the screen yet. So going through the messages, it turns out that the message is this one. Ally attacked. Sweden, for some reason, is attacking the 13 colonies of Britain. So that's a little bit inconvenient. It's messing things up because, of course, I am allied to the 13 colonies and Britain, and Sweden are allied to the Maratha Confederacy, who of course I'm thinking of making my enemy, so it seems that things are naturally aligning here for a war against Sweden and the Marathi in conjunction with the British in support of the 13 colonies. So I'm going to enter the war on the side of my ally. So now being at war with Sweden, I don't really know whether that's going to make a big difference to my plans in Europe, because we haven't seen any of their forces and they're right up on the edge of the map. Possibly those guys in St. Petersburg could come under threat. I was also looking around to see if they had fleets anywhere, or any sign that they were about to attack the 13 colonies, perhaps somewhere in the trade theatres, but I couldn't work out what their plan was. Maybe it was just declaring war out of spite. Now in India, I was going to declare war on the Maratha Confederacy this turn, but you can see the Mughal Empire has actually taken one of the targets I was going to go for. There's the other one in the southeast, which we're ready to go at with Costa as soon as the war starts. And the other concern I had was that the Marathi fleets are actually a fair bit more powerful than the fleets I have in the area. Well, I say the fleets, the 2 ships I have in the area. So I'm going to basically try and build loads of 4th rates to counter the fact that the Maratha Confederacy are mostly using 5th rates, and hopefully we'll be able to overpower them with an inferior number of ships. So all I'm going to do for this turn, instead of declaring war, is just prepare so that we can attack this settlement over here to the west as soon as the war starts. So we're ready to go, stack on each border and almost a whole stack in reserve. This war is about to kick off. An international army raised in support of the Dutch monarchy, perhaps the most modern and professional army in the world, had been entirely crushed in the frozen north. It was not the best of omens when the king's chosen were failing, while the old heroes of the Republic continued to achieve great victories against the very same opponent. Despite the loss being in truth down to the mistakes of field commanders, the blame for the setback fell easily onto the shoulders of King Wilhelm himself, suddenly struggling to find ways to make up for the loss now his personal military power was withered. His loss of charisma gave the States General a chance to finally start exercising the legislative power they theoretically possessed. Thanks for watching, so we'll get that war with the Marathi started and see a massive horde from the Ottoman Empire arrive in the next episode of Sinews of War.